You're up at the next item. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, Bob. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's turn, please, to file item number 10, which is an informational item, I understand. It's Mr. Coolidge and Mr. Stevens. And attached to the staff summary is a May 20th opinion letter from the California Attorney General's office on our responsible agency role, so on and so forth. Mr. Coolidge, Mr. Stevens, how do you want to proceed?
Actually, we were going to defer to Joe.
I'll start.
Oh, okay.
It's okay. As you may have read, BDCP is in the final stages of developing an administrative draft for their EIR. And they're proposing to put that out at the end of February, although I think there may be some holes in it. There may be a few things that are missing. Our independent science program is developing a follow-up peer review to look at the effects analysis that will be out, and they're responding back to Department of Water Resources and the Fish and Wildlife agencies by June the 2nd, I believe. The agencies have asked the lead agencies, the responsible agencies, and we are a responsible agency under the law, to prepare comments for them on the administrative draft of the EIR sometime in April, I believe.
Two batches of documents are coming out as part of the...
Get the mic closer to you, Keith,
Explain
please.
it. Yes.
Sorry. Two batches are coming. Well, actually, it's three batches, but two review periods for the administrative draft, the one that responsible agencies will get to chew over. And while there are quite a few documents up on the EIR on their website now, they're anticipating a release on February 27th of a portion of the EIR for responsible agencies to review. We have 30 days to get comments back in. And then there will be a second batch, or actually a third batch, two batches on the 27th of February, one more on or around the first week in May, which we will also have 30 days to respond to. And so we're looking at here using Arcadis, which is under a task order, an existing task order to help us review BDCP, to prepare responsible agency comments on the batch that comes out February 27th and the batch that comes out, I think it's May 2nd.
Right. So, and the point of coming to you was to actually let you know what we'll be using as we prepare those administrative draft comments. We expect that staff will do that because typically those are not done through the public forum, although they certainly will become public in the future. There will be the EIR itself is expected to be released. They say by the end of June. Frankly, I think it's probably going to be a little bit later because the process is going to be iterative. As they find problems, they'll have to fix them, and they're actually doing some of what we've been doing. They're going to be going through drafts and making things better. But when we have the public draft EIR, EIS, we will be expected to make public comments, and we would expect first the Independent Science Board, which under the law is supposed to make comments which they send to us and to the Department of Fish and Game. Then we would expect to have to review some items that are maybe policy or legal related, not related to science, and then combine all of those into a comment letter, which we would bring to the council, which we would then send to BDCP. And probably the principal thing I want to make sure that we do is cover everything that might be a concern later on, assuming they complete the process, so that there aren't any surprises. So I don't want, assuming that they complete BDCP and there's an appeal to the council, if there are issues that the council thinks are important, I want to make sure that we tell them about those issues in our comment letters so that they aren't surprised if something comes up. And so we aren't surprised. Oops.
In some sense, I think the starting point for the staff analysis ought to be the 4 prior letters on scoping that we have sent to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan under our statutory role. It's certainly not restricted to that in any means, but that we have said those things before, and the question is, based on whatever new evidence, does it meet what we suggested before? That's a start, but that's just a starting point.
That is a starting place.
I suspect we're talking about
and then
how many pages long is likely the Bay Delta Conservation Plan EIR?
Oh, they're talking in the neighborhood, I guess, of 20,000.
Yeah.
About 10
Make
times.
us look like pikers in length, if nothing else. So Joe, I think the most difficult job you've got in terms of an internal review by responsible agencies is to try to spend enough time to understand the overall issues without getting lost in the thousands of complicated, detailed comments that are, they're certainly important, but if we don't have a perspective to start, being precise on details is not going to provide it.
Okay.
And that's why I think starting with our original letters is probably not a bad way to approach it.
I agree. Go.
Mr. Stevens.
Just a finer point on that. I might suggest that we actually start with what the statute talks about. And,
okay. Sure.
And I think that our letters, our previous letters were consistent with what the statute talks about, but for the most part they were focused in on the notice of preparation, I think, on the BDCP, which is a real stale document now. That at that point, one of the issues was whether or not it was going to be an NCCP, which is the gold standard of conservation planning, or whether or not it was going to be a more narrowly focused CISA take permit, one of those issues. And we weighed in as well as others, even though we didn't come into existence until years after the NOP was actually put out. So some of those issues are a bit stale, but I think the point of this presentation and the purpose of attaching for your reference a memo that we provided to you from the Attorney General's office many months back was to refresh our memory as to our unique role as a responsible agency under CEQA, because we don't really have a discretionary decision to make with regard to approval of BDCP, and point out what the statutory criteria, as Joe was talking about, for inclusion into the Delta Plan really is. And that, at least in my mind, should be the focus, and I think that's consistent with what you were talking about, Mr. Chair, of focusing in on the real important issues. And then, as Joe said, the idea here is to make sure there really aren't any surprises when we get down to the end game.
So this item was just an information item, but I wanted the council to be aware that this draft document is going to be coming out and the processes will ramp up. And there are a few things that will be more controversial in this state than that EIR and the decisions that DWR and Department of Fish and Game make over the next year to 2 years.
Okay. Don?
Just a question. As I read back through the memo you provided in May of 2010, if it came to the council on appeal that in addition to findings on an appeal in EIR, we would also have to make the finding that it complied with the NCCP? That was in one of the footnotes. And so we have to actually make that. And on what basis do we make that determination? Or what information is available to us to make?
Right. Well, the way that it works is that if the fisheries agencies actually permit the BDCP as an NCCP, I'm sorry to talk in acronyms, NCCP/HCP, Habitat Conservation Plan under the federal law, Fish and Game has to make a determination that the BDCP complies with the statutory criteria in the Delta Reform Act, which is, like you point out, one area is it has to comply with the NCCP law. The second is it has to comply with CEQA with some kind of enhanced criteria that the document has to thoroughly evaluate and analyze. and that's laid out. So Fish and Game would have to make that determination, and the statute then goes on to say, but that determination by Fish and Game can be appealed to you. So as part of the topic actually came up earlier today when we were talking about the rules governing appeals that you adopted last year. One of those sections had to do with appeals governing BDCP. And so we laid out a process for what happens if Fish and Game makes the determination, somebody appeals, what kind of information are we going to be looking at, what are the timelines going to be on appeal, what's the standard of, you may recall that there was some controversy about what the standard of review was. That's now in a regulation that's in effect. But in any event, so it's kind of a convoluted, unique process with regard to the appeal. And as you correctly point out, you've got this other oddity in the law where it gives the council other unique roles with regard to BDCP. For instance, DWR has to consult with us in preparing BDCP, so a consultative role. And then there's just a one sentence that says the council is also a responsible agency on the EIR. And so this memo from the Attorney General's office is focused primarily on the responsible agency under CEQA, but there's a crossover, as you point out, with regard to the appellate role. So assuming we ever get down to an end game, there would have to be an independent decision by this council that, with regard to its CEQA role, and a decision with regard to the appeal of the Fish and Game determination that BDCP is worthy of being incorporated into the Delta Plan and eligible for state funding.
Chris, just one follow-on question, though, is responsible agency, and going back to what Joe was just pointing out, that you want to make comments timely and review the information, submit those. But assuming we didn't make comments about a particular matter, but then it came on us an appeal, and the council then at that point, in that role, made a determination, we're not bound up just because we're not the sole commenter on this document, so we're going to submit comments about things that we're familiar with or where we see areas of potential issue, but that doesn't preclude this council, whoever that is, assuming it got to us to appeal, that make a determination. I mean, the argument saying, well, you should have told us that as a responsible agency 2 years ago or a year ago. I mean, those become separate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That doesn't bias our decision. Our decision on appeal is going to be based on the record that Fish and Game presents with regard to its determination. And it's a unique role, again, with regard to providing comments in a CEQA forum that are similar to the types of comments that you may be deciding on appeal. But the legislature has decided in its wisdom that it's going to give us various roles, and that we shouldn't shy away from any of those roles, but should embrace them and provide the kind of feedback to DWR as a lead agency under the CEQA process to hopefully ensure that there aren't any surprises if we get down to an appeal.
And the council also has statutory authorization to make recommendations on BDCP implementation should or once it be approved.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Gentlemen, anything else on that? Joe? Okay. All right, members, thank you very much. The